Hey, what's up? John Summers here. So I am here in Barcelona, just going for a walk today, and I want to do a video on a book I read called The Leangains Method by Martin Berkhan. You can check that out here. If you don't know who he is, he's the guy that basically popularized intermittent fasting. He's been around for quite some time, and he actually kind of disappeared from the fitness scene for quite a few years. But he came back and he wrote a book. As soon as I heard this book was coming out, I immediately pre-ordered it and bought it, because this guy is the real deal. If you look at his physique over the years, he's maintained very low body fat, very high muscular physique naturally, as far as I can tell. I got the book and I have mixed thoughts about the book. It's definitely a good book, definitely a book I'd recommend. I was hoping that he'd have a more intense protocol, right? But the book is really designed for more of the general audience, right? More of just a general way of how to get lean, to stay lean. One of the things that I expected from the book that I didn't see was I expected more on intermittent fasting, but it's kind of funny because even though he's the one who popularized intermittent fasting, he basically does not really talk about it in the book. That's not his protocol. If you look at the science behind it, and I've done some videos on this, I don't know if we can find the videos, but I've done videos talking about intermittent fasting, talking about how it's not a magic bullet, right? And that's basically what he says. If you look at the studies, if you look at the science behind it, there's nothing that really shows an accelerated fat loss. Regardless of whether there's a improvement with intermittent fasting or not, the science, it's such a small improvement that it's not worth worrying so much about, right? I think that's kind of the key there. And instead, what he goes into is basically something that I think a lot of people haven't really talked about a lot in the fitness industry, which is the actual caloric content of food, why the calorie is essentially wrong. And he gives you some really good tips in the book about what you should eat. He recommends a diet of about 50% to 60% protein, which is extremely high, but it makes a lot of sense when you see the science behind it, when you think about it. If you're eating protein, about 75% of those calories are only usable. So it's going to help you to stay in a diet, to be more full, to make sure that you're getting enough protein for muscle synthesis, and it's going to be one of the most beneficial things. I'm not so sure on the whole, there's some science behind the idea that you can only burn so much fat at a time, but I think fasting actually changes that, where you don't end up being catabolic. It's really solid advice, I'd say, for most people, right? If you want to get lean, if you just follow what he says in this book, I think you're going to have an easier time doing it, and it's really simple. And I think that's the key. It's sometimes people overcomplicate it. I do myself. I'm trying to optimize things. But sometimes when you optimize things, as he talks about in the book, what ends up happening is that compliance falls off. He's also got some workout routines in there, which I feel like they're a little bit anemic. I have found that you don't have to be in the gym every day, right? I mean, my protocol for the last probably 5 or 6 years has been 3 times a week lifting. That's it. Now, he's really got them down to 45 minutes and just some very basic lifts. I mean, it really looks like a very small workload, but he's been able to get results on it. So it's worth trying. I'm not gonna go that low on volume, but it's worth trying, especially if you're starting out too. I think you're gonna find that the lower volume is all that you need. You don't need a huge amount of volume, and especially if you're eating enough protein. He does emphasize the point that all you need is the basics, right? You don't need to be complicated with all these recipes and stuff like that. And I totally agree with him, because I think a lot of times people get all obsessed with variety and trying to make all these complicated recipes, and it makes it hard. But if you have something simple, and if you've got simple guidelines, then you can put it together. He also has a large emphasis on how to count calories and how to figure out what you should be at. I'm not a huge calorie counter. I feel like that does knock off compliance. So my methods are a little bit different than that, but I can't disagree with his methods, because they'll certainly work. Overall, really good book. I think, for someone who's more on the advanced side, I think it's going to be a little bit disappointing, because there's nothing extreme in there. I was looking for some extreme, some science behind fasting for longer periods of time and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's definitely a book that is worth reading. And I think this is kind of what I'd say about the book in general. Like the biggest takeaway from the book is that if you read it and you understand how calories work and how he gives you guidelines, right? And if you understand these guidelines, if you think in your head, oh, I need to just be eating a lot of protein, I need to be essentially lifting, and focusing on core lifts, right? All of these kind of things, like if you understand kind of the principles that he outlines in the book and the points of possible failure, you're not necessarily it's not going to guarantee success, but you can be successful just by following that. So my biggest takeaway from the book was the value of high protein in the diet. That, I think it was worth the price, worth the time to read just to get that. You can let me know what you think about it. I'm curious to hear some opinions on it, because I think it's going to be a fairly controversial book. He calls out one of the fitness YouTubers in that book as well. You'll know who he is when you read the book, and it's kind of funny. A little animosity there. But yeah, all right. If you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.